And typically, tour operators or people working in this industry are working with some or all of this sort of supply chain or value chain, as it were. And if you're an agent or a tour operator, somebody that's delivering products to people, then you might be sitting up here. There's the consumer over on the top right. This bit represents the places where we do the activities. So this is where we find the hotels, this is where we run our excursion program. But of course, we can't do any of that in the destination without the intervention of some suppliers. And so the tour operator has to work through the suppliers to provide the product, and they have to work towards the customer to get them to purchase it and participate. So you've got a big influence. Where do you begin? Well, this is where you've got to learn to start taking some decisions. It's about prioritizing. It's about thinking very, very carefully about the things that you are going to do and the things that you are not, or at least you're not going to do right now. You're going to put them on the back burner and you'll go back to them when you've got more time. So prioritization is key to managing sustainability. Now, the best way to do this is to think about the things that you can influence. You might have direct control over something. For instance, anything that goes on in your office environment is pretty much within your ability to directly affect and influence. You could make some decisions now, and tomorrow those changes will be in place. There are some people that you work with, hoteliers maybe, or transport providers, or excursion providers, that you work with very regularly and you have a good relationship with them. So in fact, they would respect you and you could have an influence on what they do. So that might be not so direct, it might be indirect, but you still have some control over that. So this first stage is about trying to work out what can I do and what can't I do, and put it into some sort of list of priorities. So, can you control it? Is it directly or indirectly? Can I do it in a way that isn't going to lose me money? Remember we talked, didn't we, about these quick wins and about the piggy bank, which I've drawn again just to prove I can do one. And this is about, not spending lots and lots of money and eating away at the bottom line, which might stop me delivering good quality products. It's about doing it in a way that will make it cost effective and not affect the business. You might have to do some things differently, or you might have to bring some new things into the business. So, is what you need available? Can you get your hands on it? Well, luckily, Travelife, it's been going for quite a few years now, and we've amassed together lots of tools and practices in the system that you can get your hands on. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I'm going to say that over and over during the next day and a half, okay? Because this, sadly, in sustainability happens all the time, okay? Don't reinvent the wheel. Even the European Commission, the European Union, constantly award people money for projects that are doing the same thing that people have done elsewhere. And I just find that a disgraceful misuse of public money. It's much better to support and help a project that has been successful roll out on a grander scale rather than go right back to the basics. That really does bug me. So take that as a lesson, and don't look around to see what's there already. Some things you might have to create, but not many. Do you have the tools that you need? So are the things that you've got to bring in before you can actually start to make a difference? Well, as I said, Travelife's got a lot of this already. It's sitting in the system, so you do need to make use of it. We're going to start looking at that first top left corner, internal management. And the reason for that, and I mentioned this morning, is that if you're going to emerge as a more sustainable business, and you're going to do that visibly, one of the things that will be expected is that you will start to tackle the supply chain. Well, how can you go to these people and ask them to create a policy, for instance, or to manage their information flow to customers better if you're not doing the same? You need to practice what you preach. So, that's why we're going to look at internal management, because this is about your business. It's about what goes on every day in the office with the employees, things that are directly happening to make it all work. It's nothing about the destination, it's nothing about the supply chain, it's just about running a business. Okay? That's what the internal management is. So, what are the things that you can influence? Well, you've got some very good control over all of these areas. Human rights, so this is very much about employees and the relationships with the employer. Okay? It's also about subcontractors and suppliers down the supply chain. Okay? What do you pass on to them? What about sort of general social policies that you have in the business that are about communities and people? How do you work with those people? What sort of relationships do you have with the people in the community in which your business is based? You know, you're not just an implant inside that community. You're an active business in the community. And let's face it, if you need to do anything, you're going to have to use elements of the community in order to enable that to happen. You may have to go to people for loans. Well, that's people in the community. You may have to go to find someone to give you permission to build something or to do a new activity. You need some sort of license. They're people from the local community. So if you sorry to use this, but if you piss people off in the community, then they're going to make it difficult for you. I just realised that's on video. They're going to make it difficult for you. You can edit that out, can't you? They'll make it difficult for you as a business if you really upset them. Okay? And environmental management. Well, this is relatively easy as a concept because it's the most tangible. You can really see the difference that you make pretty much immediately if you look at how you control your impact here. But it has to be said that for some of you who are relatively small businesses, then this might not be the biggest element. It might be lying somewhere up here, but it's still significant enough to tackle, because here is where you learn. In managing these, you learn so many skills that are transferable to these other areas. So it's really good to practice it here. And you save some money at the same time. And that's where the money goes into this little beast here, to help you to fund some of the new things that you're going to do. So we're going to go through each of these and see what exactly can we tap into to help us to organise internally sustainable activities and processes. So, go and have a look at the International Labour Organisation standards. You can find them on the internet. Just put ILO and they'll come up. Lots of interpretations of them, but it's best to go back to the proper, full, international set of standards. Okay? This is a UN-formed organisation that's looking at it for the global perspective on labour standards. There's lots of organisations that have then, I'm not going to say they're spin-offs, but they've taken those standards and made them a little bit more comprehensible. Because like any UN body, sometimes the stuff that comes out of their mouths is really difficult to understand. And it's nice if some people can actually interpret it and make it into something that's very easy to follow. So organisations like the Ethical Trading Initiative, ETI, they break it down into some very simple, logical steps. It's easy to understand. And some of those things might be things like no discrimination. So whilst we're all sitting here thinking, no, we don't have any discrimination in our workplace, well, what exactly does that mean? Can you break it down into all forms of discrimination? And could you identify any? And if you don't have any visible signs of discrimination, have you got some procedures in place that make sure that when people are following the processes and procedures that they have to do, that they actually think about this and take it into account? So when you recruit new people, do you actually positively think about how you recruit people to ensure that you're not discriminating? Do you actively do that? Or do you just think it's part of the process? It's much better to have it documented. And this is one of the things that I really can't stress enough. Documentation and evidence when you're working in sustainability areas is really important, because people want proof. That license to operate is only going to be granted when somebody is 100% sure that what you say you do, you deliver, you actually do. So you've got to be able to give people proof. So it's all right saying, oh yes, none of us in our company discriminate against anybody for anything. But where is the proof of that? It's usually documentation. No forced labour. You might think, well, nobody's forced to working for us as a business. Well, actually, this often is hidden from view, forced labour. There are some obvious ways in which you can find out if people are being made to work, because if you discover that people are withholding ID documents, then that's difficult to walk away from a business, because it's your property, and if somebody's got hold of it, then you feel as if you've got to stay there, because otherwise something's going to happen to your property. It's the same with being paid in advance. So nobody should be paid before they've completed work. You should only be paid afterwards. Because if you're paid at the beginning of the month, then that's pretty much saying, well, you've already had your money, so like it or not, you'll be with us for the next 4 weeks. That's forced labour. It is. In the UK, we've got a real problem at the moment with subcontracting. So particularly in the hotel sector, this happens. People are brought in for housekeeping services or laundry services, even more. And some of the people coming in are working for rather unscrupulous organisations who are bringing them into the country, often they're immigrants, bringing them into the country with promises of all sorts of things, but they're paying them ridiculously low wages, making them work really long hours and housing them in appalling conditions. But because these people are in a desperate situation, they have no choice. They have to do this to get the little amount of money they have to send it back home to the people that are really struggling. That's how it all works. This is forced labour. So, are you working with any subcontractors where that could be potentially happening? No child labour. Well, again, there's an assumption, no, we don't have any kids working here. But do you know, if you're a larger operator and you've got, different offices, or you're an operator that might have a large or a small accommodation. You know, it's amazing what operators get involved in. Do you know that there's none of this happening? Or if it is happening, are you controlling it in some sort of a way? You need to ask the questions. Even if you think you know the answer, you've got to provide the evidence. Freedom of association. Are people allowed in your workplace to freely express their opinions to each other and then come to the management at the top and say, hey, we are not happy with this because of, and we would like to discuss with you round the table how we could make it better. Does that happen? Is that acceptable? It doesn't have to be about unions, but unions are a really good way of making this work. Freedom of association is about giving people the right to participate in creating the working environment and making the conditions good for you and for them. So all of those things you might just take for granted, but in fact, have you got this? Can you start going and looking to try and find the evidence? Where's the proof? This is a little few slides to help you with a rather difficult area in sort of human rights, which is this protection of children from sexual exploitation, or well, it's both prostitution and pornography, trafficking, these sorts of things. So there is a code of conduct that you can sign up to, which is on the web. It's called The Code. So you just put in thecode.org and you'll be able to read, I'm going to show you what it entails here, read the contents of the code and decide, am I able to sign that as a business? It sends out a really clear positive message if you're able to do it, but of course you have to practice what you preach. So if you say you're doing it, you have to be doing it. So it was developed, the code, with the private sector and NGOs to try and try ultimately to wipe sexual exploitation of children out of the tourism sector. Of course, that's easier said than done, but we've got to work on a way to do that. It's been going for quite a long time, and it's Scandinavia that really were the sort of pioneers with this. In terms of tour operators, then certainly, I don't know if you've heard of air tours in Sweden, and well, there was TUI Nordic as well, that both were working on this in something called the Tour Operators Initiative, which in the late 90s was a group of tour operators who wanted to try and capture good practice and use those as the way in which they could stimulate other operators to jump on the sustainability train. So now there's about 1,000 companies in 38 countries signed up to the code, but you do have to follow these 6 steps. So you have to have a policy. Okay? Again, it's all about evidence. So something has to be written down, and it has to be the truth about what you do to make sure that this isn't happening. You need to train people. So all members of staff in the business need to know what it is and why it's there and how you manage it. You need to introduce clauses in contract suppliers that says, we will not work with any business that does not implement a policy on eradicating the sexual exploitation of children. It's as simple as that. Of course you need to police it, so you might need to try and do some sort of spot checking. That's the hardest bit. Okay? But the spot checking can be simply by asking them to report on their activities, as you would be asked by thecode.org. They ask you to report. So you need to give information to your customers about this. Now you might think, oh, that's really going to put people off travelling with us, talking about the sexual exploitation of children. You don't have to put it into those terms. You know, you can give messages out that say simply things like, as a business, we respect and protect the rights of children. We have a fully comprehensive policy to look at all aspects of this, please download a copy from our website or whatever. It's that simple. You don't have to go into all the grisly details of what it's about. You need to be able to identify organisations in the places where you work that can support you in this. So are there any around? Is there, for instance in Croatia, a Croatian arm of UHPA? Quite possibly there is. I don't know. Do you know the answer to that? Anybody? Is there a Croatian UHPA? There will be an organisation that's similar to that somewhere. It's just a question of finding. But you do have to produce this annual report, and again, that's about evidence. What do you put in the report? Well, it's not reporting on whether or not you've identified any of it. It's reporting on whether or not the implementation of this has been successful. So, how many people were trained? Okay? How many contracts that you've got with suppliers have got this written into them? It's about just reporting on your process. So actually, it is quite painless. It's not difficult. These are just some simple things that you can use as examples of how to convey the message. Our company condemns the sexual exploitation of children in travel and tourism. Simple statement, and it doesn't require you to say much more. We train our staff and partners to ensure they know what to do if they suspect such exploitation in the course of their work. Okay? This is a little bit about how you would put that into contracts. Okay? And in hotels, for instance, then we train hotels. When I go and audit hotels, I'm constantly having to train them in how to implement this as a hotel. And, you know, even if they suspect something, it's not enough just to say, well, I'll observe it over the course of the week. Well, over the course of the week, there could be a lot of harm done to a child. If there's any suspicion, you have to deal with it straight away. That's what it's about. Okay, so here are some things that you can, physical things that you can do in the sort of the social chapter in terms of showing people that you are socially sustainable. So, how do you show people, you know, you might say, yeah, we comply with the law. How do you show people that you comply with the law? Do you know what all the laws are that you're supposed to follow? Is there a record of them? Do you have a list of all the laws that you need to be following as a business, and somebody assigned to say, yes, we do this, it's implemented. Tick, 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 tick. That's really good practice, but it's quite hard to do. Now, of course, you might identify other organisations that do some of that for you and make it less of a burden. So, for instance, if you're part of a trade association, the trade association might have a role to play in identifying some laws that are legal requirements for tour operators. That might be such things as financial protection, for instance. And therefore, they might monitor that as part of their relationship with you, in which case you can, the word in English is subrogate, I don't know if you understand that word, but it means that you pass off responsibility to somebody else because you trust that they will actually do the job for you. That's what it means. So you can look at ways in which you do that. This is quite a challenge for a lot of people, showing that they comply. They just take it for granted. It's a hard one. Formal written contracts. Well, strangely enough, even in the International Labour Organization, it does not require formal written contracts. It does not say that everybody has a right to a formal written contract. It says everybody has a right to a contract, which can be verbal. But the physical sign that there has been a verbal contract has got to be evidenced. Well, that might be the fact that the person's working. Because the minute you start working, you can be deemed to have accepted a verbal contract, providing there's no forced labour. Sometimes people get people to sign a little piece of paper to say, we agree to a salary of this per annum and working hours of and so many days annual leave. And that's not really a contract, it's just a formal, I suppose, terms and conditions agreement. Travelife, because it's recommended, well, it's morally the right thing to do anyway, but because it's recommended in such standards as ISO 26000, for instance, which is a standard. Living wage. Now, this one is, again, it's a very difficult concept to have, a living wage. What is a living wage? Well, a living wage to you is not going to be the same as a living wage to me, and it's not going to be the same as a living wage to you, and that's not going to be the same as a living wage to you. Why? Because we've all got different circumstances. I even live in a different country. So living wage is based on your own personal circumstances. So I don't know. No, you might have 7 small children to support, in which case your wage has to be sufficient to allow them the basic requirements for what's acceptable for, you know, keeping 7 kids in a good sort of standard. Whereas, you know, I might just have me to think about and nobody else. So my living wage hasn't got to think about where that's being spread. It's just me. Do you get the idea? So this is quite difficult because sometimes governments, sometimes organisations try to propose a living wage for a country or a destination, but actually that's not right. Because people's circumstances differ from one part of a country to another, and even within one town like Zagreb, for instance, you've got so many different social sort of levels. What does this mean to a business? It means that if you can begin to take into account the lifestyle and basic needs of individual people, and you are reflecting that in a fair rate of pay for them, then you are beginning to understand the concept of a living wage. There is a minimum wage. That's often put down in writing by the government. Okay? That's a basic minimum wage for everybody across the board. So a living wage is always higher than that. Always. But the requirement really is to pay at least the minimum wage, but aim for this. And if you can show how you're trying to get to that, that really shows that you are a business that's really got the hang of this. Social insurance in some countries is a legal requirement, in others it's not. I don't know what the situation here is in Croatia. Certainly where I come from, if you are an employer, then you have to pay a proportion of this, and another proportion comes out of the salary. So it's a sort of a dual contribution. But even social insurance in some places is insufficient to provide people with good benefits. So for instance, many employers in Europe will provide optional additional private healthcare insurance because the cost of medical treatment is very expensive. And if your employees get ill, they have time off work, and that means that you've got to spend more money covering their work. So if you actually take care of it, in the long run it pays off. So it's good to think about whether or not this is something that you could work on in the business. Of course, providing people with training and skills is key to motivating people in the workplace. It's really difficult, and I've been in this position as a manager, where I've known right from the start that the training I'm providing to the person working for me is going to be the reason they leave. Sadly, that's a fact of life. People learn, they get better, and they look for something that's going to give them more money. So you're training people knowing that as a result they might be able to go somewhere else. But that doesn't matter. This is about you, again, improving people. It's about showing that you care about the workforce. If you've got lots of other things going on in the business, you won't lose them. They'll stay because they're highly motivated to work in your company. We'll talk about a lot of those things later. This is just some examples. This company is a Kenyan specialist. It's a British tour operator. They're not very big. but they have a contributory healthcare insurance on top of the state requirement for their employees. So it's like a private healthcare plan. It's optional, you don't have to do it. And they also have a policy where they will only recruit people in the destination. So they recruit local residents, and it's only when they cannot fill a position, if that ever happens, that they start to look outside of the country. So 99% of the people working for Guerba are Kenyan nationals, because that's where most of their tourism is. Virgin Holidays. I said earlier today that I'm going to give you an example of a company that is notorious for paying dreadful rates of pay, and it's these guys. Virgin Holidays are some of the poorest salaries in the sector in the UK, but nobody leaves. Everybody wants to work for Virgin. Their turnover in terms of staff is down there. Why? Well, it's because of all the extra things that they get. Because at the end of it, it's not just about the money in your hand, it's about your general quality of life. And if you're happy at work, and if you've got some extra benefits that really will add into this money that's going into your pocket, it makes a big difference. Look at what they do. They have formal written contracts, okay? That's pretty standard. But they have formal written contracts for everybody, even if they're only there for one day. There's a written contract. So they make it right across the board. They have loads and loads of staff benefits. If you work for Virgin Holidays, you can, if you've got some days booked off, turn up at an airport where Virgin operates, and if there's an empty seat on a Virgin flight, if you work for Virgin Holidays, you can get on it free of charge, and you can go wherever you like, even if it's long haul, as long as there's a seat. Of course, there's a catch, and the catch is you've got to be back in time to start your work again when you're supposed to be. So if you're going to go to the airport in the long haul destination waiting for a seat back, and there isn't one, you're going to have to book some extra days off, or grovel and scrape to your manager about why you're late for work or whatever it is. But it's really good benefit, and most of the people working for Virgin Holidays are travelling, all over the place. Of course, whether or not that's a good thing in terms of carbon footprint, who knows? We'll talk about that later. No. Well, they also have this very proactive medical support system. So one of the things that they do is they bring doctors and nursing practitioners into the business, in premises, regularly. It's like every month or so. And to give people an opportunity to have a health check free of charge. So they get all the vaccinations. When it comes to winter, if they, they all get the chance to have flu vaccinations if they want them. They don't have to have them. But all of the vaccinations they need if they're travelling and all of that, it's all free. Virgin pays for it all and provides it. Why? Because they want a healthy workforce. Then they don't have any days off. They hardly have anybody skipping work in Virgin Holidays. There's no reason to miss work because it's a nice environment and a nice place in which to work. They do lots of local recruitment. It's a bit like Guerba Travel. They recruit locally if they're in a destination before they'll recruit back home in the UK. And they have a complaints procedure for staff. So this is an anonymous, web-based system where staff, I think they do it every 6 months, staff are able to say exactly what they think about the different aspects of working for the company. And the company then analyses them. Well, they have somebody do it for them, but it's analysed. And then Richard Branson, who, by the way, has met personally every single member of staff, is very visible, is constantly making sure that there's this family type of relationship. He will then provide workshop, as it were, in what Virgin Holidays are doing to address the things that were brought up in the complaints process. So it's quite sophisticated and it works really well. So what about community then? What can you do to show people that you are sustaining your business in terms of your role in the community and your relationship with the community? Well, you need to show that you're complying with laws again. So remember, it's evidence. And sometimes this bit, this isn't often at a sort of a national level sometimes. This is local. So are there local bylaws that you might not be aware of? You should be. But how do you show that you actually embrace those? It's about finding out what you should and shouldn't be doing. Paying taxes, I mean, that, you know, how do you avoid doing that? Well, I mean, I don't know whether you've seen any of the sort of press from where I come from recently, but we've got some organisations that are just not paying any tax at all. Most of them are involved in providing coffee shops and things around, without naming any names. Following local planning regulations. A lot of people try to get away with this, but again, you know, if you were to build something or carry out some activity without the right requirements, then there are usually some serious impacts on the back of that. So it means usually that those scales are going to tip down quite heavily on the left-hand side here. This is protecting it. Does your business actively consult with the community? How might you do that? So, no response tells me you're not doing it. So how might you start doing it? Okay, this is about finding out what matters in the local community. There are, in most countries, trade associations. So for a start, the trade association relationship is part of the solution to this, because you could then say, well, the trade association should be having some dialogue with trade associations of different sectors, so we can do some cross-fertilisation. Okay? The trade association might also meet with the local council to find out, well, you know, what is it that we can work on together and bring our businesses into it? How can they be involved? What about Chamber of Trade? Some people are working in a local Chamber of Trade with, again, other businesses. That's a good way to get to know about the community issues. The Mayor's Office, the Council, simple action groups. You know, what if you were to provide, let's say, time for one or more of your employees to participate in some local action group that's working on some really important local issues, whether that's motivating young people who are unemployed or something to do with management of illegal drugs, or, you know, lots of different issues going on in a community. How can you become involved in that? Local projects is a good way to do this, but you have to be careful how you do that. If you just throw money at something, then that doesn't really talk very much about involvement. That's just throwing money at it, and that's it. And a lot of people think that that's the answer, but it isn't. It's about supporting in other ways. So do you allow people to take part in local projects? Do they actually go and spend maybe one day a year working for a local charity and you still pay them? That's really valuable. And local recruitment. Well, this is challenging, I know, for some people. I mean, it's challenging in most of Europe at the moment because the dynamics of trade and sort of the global crisis. But even so, you know, there should be an active approach to skilling up local people so that they can access the industry. Okay. so let's get into the environment bit. This is a little bit more tangible because these are the things that you can actually see. And therefore you can see some real impact change with the environmental things. So we're going to look at these in some detail. Okay? Paper mostly, things that you need to buy to use in your business. That might be stationery, cleaning chemicals, but all sorts of things. Toner for the printer or equipment, new PCs or whatever it happens to be. How you use water might not be a big impact on a tour operator's office, but you know, it's a way of learning how to manage. Energy, that could be quite a high bill in some offices, especially if you've got air conditioning. Waste, well, we talked about waste, we know what the customers think of it, so how are you going to start to change the sort of mentality in your office environment with regards to waste? And how do you train people and make sure that they're skilled to understand sustainability? Well, one of the things that you could do after you've been here is you could go and organise a training session with the people you work with and pass it on while it's fresh in your head. That's possible. Okay, so paper then. Well, this is a big one. Why? Because tour operators are notorious for producing lots and lots of paper. They're getting a lot better at it, but they still produce an awful lot. There are tickets, ticket wallets, information that's sent out with tickets, brochures to distribute to people to get them to choose holidays in the first place. People print off itineraries, codes of practice. There's just paper coming out of machines all over the place. So it's huge. Why should we be concerned? Because it's actually paper production globally, not just tour operators, but everybody. It's equivalent in its production process to the whole of the carbon dioxide emissions of the entire airline industry. That's how big it is. It's huge, just paper. So anything that we can do to help to bring that down is going to be a contributor. And of course, what's the issue? Well, we're losing trees, forests are declining, therefore the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is slowly climbing because we're producing more of it as well. And we've got this global warming issue, which we will return to later as well. So what can we do as tour operators? Well, we're going to start compiling a list of steps to take.